All right. Next up, we've got Alison with the State Wildlife Action Plan. Alison Cariveau has worked in wildlife monitoring, research, and habitat conservation for 30 years across the 11 states, much of the time focused on avian conservation. She's worked for nonprofits, including Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, Audubon Upper Mississippi River, Monarch Joint Venture, and the Nature Conservancy, and agencies including USGS and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She enjoys coordinating the State Wildlife Action Plan at the Minnesota DNR, where she can work with a diverse set of partners to advance conservation for vulnerable species. Alison.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to share about our newly revised State Wildlife Action Plan. Curious to know how many people here are well-versed in this. So I'm going to start with a show of hands for people who know the 2005 plan. This is the real thick one. Okay, keep your hands up. And then who's used the 2015 plan? A few more people, okay? And then who helped with this 2025 revision? Even more people, okay? Super, thank you. I just wanted to highlight, we had, I think, 327 people contributed to this version of the plan from 64 different organizations. Super phenomenal. We just really wanted to take advantage of the expertise of all the people in our state. Many of you are here, and huge appreciation for your help in pulling together the content for this plan. And then what I'm going to talk about today is ways that we can all use it when it comes out. It's under review right now by Fish and Wildlife Service, and we hope it's approved in the next couple months, and then we'll post it online, and I'll give you some sneak peeks. So today I'm just going to kind of hit the high points, give you hopefully pique your interest so you can come back and look at it later. It's really big, so there's a lot there. I'm going to go over some of these acronyms that we like to use. I will highlight what's new, what's updated, and then what you can do with it. So for those of you who are less familiar with the State Wildlife Action Plan, I'm going to just do this briefly, tell you what they are. These are 10-year plans of action for at-risk, declining, rare, vulnerable species, and they are put into place in all of the states, and these unlock U.S. Fish and Wildlife State Wildlife Grant Funds, and these are the funds from the federal government for at-risk wildlife species, so these are not hunted and fished, and these are most of our species, many of which are vulnerable and at risk, and so it's a very, very important funding stream. And these funds can be applied for surveys, research, habitat enhancement, and public engagement. So when we say actions, we're thinking all of it. And I would say that when we write these plans, this is not a plan for us, this is a plan for everyone. So we are trying to help be just an information hub, pulling all of what everyone's doing together in a place where people can find it and take use of it, and that we are all pulling in the same direction. So providing that synergy across jurisdictions, agencies, NGOs, and academics. So the goal of the plan is to guide, facilitate, and inspire conservation actions to sustain the long-term health and viability of Minnesota's biodiversity with a focus on species that are rare, declining, or vulnerable and their habitats. So pretty broad brush approach. And now I'm going to talk about these SGCN, the species in greatest conservation need. Many of you are very familiar with this, but just a quick recap for those of you who are not. These include our threatened and endangered species, but also reaches out into that more common group of species, but those that have declines or at risk. And we identified those through a conservation assessment process. I'll talk about that in a moment. This is also where we include our stewardship species, which birders are usually familiar with. This is the species that Minnesota hosts a good proportion of their population, or our population is doing better than the others. And so in either case, we take greater responsibility for those species. And then this year, we also included tribally nominated species of cultural significance, and we thought that was a nice opportunity to highlight species that have conservation needs but are also specifically significant. And many of our SGCN are also culturally significant to tribes. So this is only just pulled a couple species, wild rice and snowshoe hare, that we hadn't already elevated to SGCN status and included those in the list. Well, I probably don't need to tell this audience why we have SGCN and why we take that broader brush approach, but we do like to remind people that when we do conservation early and when we do it holistically at the habitat level, we're hoping to be more effective, and that it's easier to do conservation than later, and also we might be able to reduce the need to list species. We have a new category this year. A lot of states did this to highlight the need for information for some species, and this allows us to do research and surveys for these species in the future. And so they're thought to be rare, but we're not really sure what their conservation status is, so it's just kind of a specific identifier for those species. And the eastern screech owl is the one bird that was selected for that, that designation. So conservation status assessments is the process by which we, evaluated all the species, and we took a really comprehensive approach this year and did a systematic assessment of all the species for which we had sufficient data. And I've highlighted this as a place where technology really came in, because we were able to access really broad data sets that are all available now that you wouldn't have been able to do 20, 30 years ago. So specifically, we were able to access eBird trends for the first time. They were able to create state-level trends for the last 15 years or so of data, and able to line that up with breeding bird survey trends, and as well as information from like NRI's point counts and our SPICE project, is Sustaining Prairies in a Changing Environment. We have point counts there, and we were able to line up all of these data and add that together. And then we used this national methodology that's hosted by NatureServe. They actually have an Excel calculator where you push in all the information, and it has three main aspects: so the rarity, the trends, and the threats. And as just sort of an aside, I'll do my aside later. I think I have a slide about it. So these S rank scores, S stands for subnational or state level ranking, and there are also global ranks. Those are the G1 through 5 you may sometimes see, but these will help you understand how imperiled the species are. So this was part of what we did this time that was different. We've had S ranks in the past, if you're familiar with the State Wildlife Action Plan, but it wasn't done in this really systematic way with the NatureServe calculator. And this makes us apples to apples with all of the other states and entities that might do this type of process. So what do we come up with? We identified more than 1,000 species in greatest conservation need, and that may take your breath away, particularly if you're familiar with the 346 that we had before. However, big news, we included plants this time and also lichens. And so we now have a much broader sense of the conservation needs in our state. And while state wildlife grant funds that I referenced earlier are not directly applicable to plants, we just really wanted to highlight that biodiversity need. I like to think of it as, for instance, there are some insects that rely upon a certain plant for their survival, and many of those relationships are yet to even be revealed. So when we think about ecosystem and biodiversity conservation, we really have to think broadly. The other thing to note about this pie graph is that there are a lot of invertebrates on here, and so that's the other place that really amplified since our last list. And in some cases, this is really driven by more information. So in other words, like for instance, we did a statewide bee survey. Now we have a lot of bees that look like they're very rare, and therefore they're at risk. So these kind of things are iterative and evolving. So we identified 860 species in need of information, and you can see on here that I've got some doubled up text there, but the pie graph is basically all invertebrates and plants, so that's the bulk. And then there are just a handful of vertebrates that were also selected for in need of information, and those are typically species for which you need DNA in order to tell them apart, or their relatedness is still needs some more resolution, such as in the Cisco fish, or these are species that have recently arrived, like we now have the evening bat, which we just don't know much about it yet because it's kind of a new arrival on the scene. So that's what this group sort of represents here. So I'm just going to highlight a little bit about the birds. So there were 79 SGCN designated, 21 from the 2015 list were not relisted in 2025. Some of this is due to recovery, such as the trumpeter swan. And then others are just sort of with like a reevaluation with 2025 data. The needs don't seem as dire as they were before. And then we've also added a handful of species here. And you're going to dive into this much better later when you can really pore over things. So this is just like a little taste. Some, highlighting sort of those S1 and S2 species, those that have the highest level of imperilment. And again, this is at the state level. And then I just wanted to highlight too that when we were doing that conservation status assessment process, we, noted that trends for birds, they're almost all trending down, right? So, I just wanted to highlight the fact that there are definitely quite a number of species with significant downward trends that are not even included in the SGCN list. So, from a bird perspective, you might even say this is not catching them all, and we're going to not be surprised if this needs to be adjusted again. And this is why we do this adjustment every 10 years. So now I'm going to just talk for a moment about sort of how the plan's put together. It's really big. We're going to offer it as chapters or modules. There are 8 species group chapters, so you could just read about aquatic invertebrates, or you could read about mammals or birds. And then we also went back to the habitat focus from that 2005 plan. People really enjoyed just being able to crack it open and read about savannas and which species use them. So we've got that back. There are 15 of those. A new one that we added is this urban and other developed habitats, and this is a place to kind of dive into all the conservation opportunity that exists in the built landscape and the working landscapes. We used a stressor action framework, which we've used in the past, but we kind of developed it a little bit more this time using this international lexicon of threats. And some of you may be familiar with. We chose, there's 24, and we actually describe these in every chapter. So you can, it's sort of like a literature review, a little synopsis of these stressors that underlie these declines or these threats to the species. And then I'm not intending you to read this slide, but this is just like a representation of the actions that then we describe are related back to the stressors. And so that's meant to provide focus to why are we doing these things. And also we can kind of map this out. So like maybe you can, well, this is a spoiler, but hopefully maybe you can actually ask in an interactive way, like for this stressor, what are the actions that could follow? We have a section in the plan monitoring research. I know that many of you here are engaged in this arena, and it's just kind of outlining the point I want to make here is it's important, and we appreciate all the data that you all are collecting. I want to go back to that eBird notion that we use those data now and that you can even get trends from that information. It's really, really exciting. And also I can say that when you look across all the species that we worked with, like the amount of data for birds is just phenomenal. And it's so different than when you're talking about, aquatic invertebrates is very different. So we should all be proud and keep it up. We really are learning a lot through everybody's contributions. I want just to highlight here, so we really see a need for effectiveness monitoring. So we've got all these great ideas about conservation actions. Can we really show that they're beneficial? Can we learn which are most beneficial? Do we have evidence for these measures, as well as mitigation, best management practices? All of that arena is very important. The other thing that came to light in that species conservation assessment process is that the data that we had the least for was threats. How are species really interacting with threats? Exposure to threats, sensitivity to threats, can they adapt to those threats? What's going on with that? That whole area seems a little bit more new, and so we wanted to highlight that here. Okay. Another section that you probably want to check out in the plan is the public engagement chapter. And that's kind of a generic name, like that could mean a lot of different things. Well, turns out it sort of means everything. So public engagement has 7 different strategies in it, and we all know what these are, but it's pretty neat to see it all carefully written out. We've done a more careful job with this time. So information resources is talking about getting the information out of science, out of the literature, and putting it in the hands of people who can use it. I think that's super important, and it takes some work, right? You even may get an email digest that summarizes 20 papers that month. Wow, that's a lot, right? And so then, like, which of those do you convey to the guy that's running the mower? Like, that's really that whole chain. Participatory sciences, community science, citizen science, that's what a lot of us are doing. So there's some information there. Habitat improvements can be habitat improvements like improving your shoreline information, backyards, lights, windows, all of those things. That's for everyone, right? So check this out. And then exciting, we're hoping to do this as a data portal. So this could take a little while, so please be patient while we build it, but we're really excited for you to be able to call up the list of things that you want to see. So I want to see birds, I want to see the SNI, I want to see the SGCN that are in this particular habitat and whatnot, okay? So that's going to be there, as well as our spatial information, which will be downloadable. So I just have a couple slides. Our Conservation Action Network was our Wildlife Action Network from last time. Super exciting. This highlights core areas based on biodiversity hotspots, which are based on the occurrences of those SGCN, both plants and animals this year, as well as other high-quality habitats. These will be like the lakes of biodiversity significance. Those are based on, or high IBI, indices of biotic integrity, those locations. Which are basically usually fish or invertebrates for streams and lakes. And then the connectivity piece is a way of representing the way that animals or plants might be able to move through the landscape from core area to core area. And this is based on a new modeling exercise done by the Nature Conservancy using CircuitScape, and it is basically a way to model the permeability of the landscape for those movements, and together, cores and corridors can make a more resilient landscape in the face of change, such as driven by a changing climate. And then conservation opportunities areas were conservation focus areas. In the last plan, we just changed the name a slight bit. And these are basically, you can see it's the same shape as the prior map, so that's mapped onto the Conservation Action Network, and these are just local places where groups can work together to collaborate to deliver projects for SGCN and their habitats. We have a couple coordinators, Jim Wanstall in the north, TJ Betcher in the south, and you can reach out to any of us for more information if you're interested in trying to join up. with any of those efforts. And then I know I'm short on time, but I did want to just say that we think that the changing climate is an important underpinning to everything that we're seeing with wildlife. And so we wanted to make sure that this was really something people could find and become more comfortable with working with. So we created a layer. This is based on the last 30 years of data. So it's not requiring any sort of imagination or projections or modeling. It's just what's already happened in comparison to the whole climate record. And we produced this information and we will serve it in the data viewer, and it's also already available in the Minnesota Geospatial Commons for everyone in our state. So in conclusion, I just want to thank everybody for their contributions to this plan. I hope I've whet your appetite for checking it out when we have it posted. And it's meant to be an information hub, has a ton of links in it, has some case studies in case that's a way that you kind of can visualize things. And we hope that you can use it and share it. And I'd like to thank our funders at the Fish and Wildlife Service. We also have LCCMR funding, and I am happy to take questions. Thanks.
Hi. Can you address the conflict between the need to protect the endangered species and the need to get the data out that this is an area that needs to be protected because certain endangered species are located there? I'm working on trying to protect a hotspot. I know there's endangered species, and expansion of a gravel pit within a few hundred yards of this wonderful marsh has been approved and will probably go to court, but I am having difficulty getting the information, what's there that needs to be protected. I know from anecdotal information certain species are there, but I can't get DNR to acknowledge what's there without filling out long form.
Well, I probably can't solve that problem. You know, I guess I'll say that we do have a Conservation Explorer program online that you can log into, and it should have spatially explicit information about species. It does take some, I think you have to get some clearance to get into it. And I would just say I appreciate the vigilance of the neighbors and the knowledgeable people who know about the resources in their communities, and that you're advocating for that conservation of that marsh. I think that's great. So you can try to find us later. There's a bunch of us here from DNR, and we can talk more.
I have an important announcement. It's not a question, I'm afraid. We're out of coffee, and there's more on the way. It should get here within 5 or 10 minutes, so be patient.
Good.
Hi, thanks, Allison. That was really cool. You didn't mention iNaturalist, but I feel like that's another tool that a lot of us use, and I don't know if that's been incorporated into your data.
Yes, thanks. Absolutely. Yeah, we used iNaturalist. I think I honed this in for the bird information. We mostly used eBird, but for other taxa, we also used iNaturalist. Absolutely.
Are there any last questions? Oh, we've got one last one, Dick.
Good morning. Thank you. Great presentation. I appreciate all the the access to this data. I think it's great. I saw lately that publication on forestry for Minnesota birds that
Yeah.
was done. With this type of information and with technology that we have, how do we, get some of this data, or I guess produce it in a way that can be a little easier translatable? For example, like with this publication of forestry, I'm trying to do like summaries on Spanish, for example. I volunteer a lot with the Hispanic community here in the metro, and this is one of the obstacles that we, when we try to engage the community and we try to, even though a lot of our community has been here for many years, but sometimes that message is better received when we use the language that people are familiar with. On this technology, like I see, nowadays there's a lot of tools out there. In the technology side, the people think about, okay, how can we translate this information a little easier?
That's a great question and a good consideration, because we are at a place where we are thinking about how do we make this more usable. So I know we have funded in the past some translations of various items into other languages, Spanish for sure, and I think that's a terrific investment. So if there's a need for it, if there's a receptive community, I think that's a great idea. Whether we could use technology to deliver that in the online versions, I think is worth exploring too. So I appreciate the suggestion. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Alison.